Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. This is the regular city council meeting of December 13th, and I am now calling the meeting to order. I would like to ask the city clerk, please call the roll.
Councillor Richardson. Okay, we got some people that are muted. Hang on.
Present.
Councillor Randall.
Present.
Councillor Runyon.
Present, and I don't know why it says no name or something on there. I'm trying to fix it.
Councillor Long.
Present.
And Councillor McLaughlin.
And present.
Mayor Mays.
Present. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Mr. New iPad, Rod Runyon, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right.
Councilor Runyon.
I'll do it in the language of iPad. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me. If you are able to stand, please do so wherever you may be. I pledge allegiance to the
Pledge
flag
allegiance to the flag
of
of the United States
America,
of America.
and to the
To the
republic
republic
for which it
stands,
one nation,
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Thank you, Councilor Runyon. Item 4 is approval of the agenda. Anybody like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
This is Randall. I'll move to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Councilor.
McLaughlin was second.
It's been moved by Councilor Randall and seconded by Councilor McLaughlin to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 5 is presentations. We have a presentation by the Dalles Area Chamber of Commerce Tourism Report. And I believe our chamber director is with us, Lisa Farquharson. Is that right?
Whoops. Okay, yes, that is correct. Sorry, we had a muting problem. So yes, I am here. And in a moment, I'll ask, actually, Izetta, can we go ahead? Can I go ahead and share my screen? Got it. All right. So good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council and the team that keeps the city running. I am Lisa Farquharson with the Dalles Area Chamber and the CEO for both the Chamber and Explore the Dalles, our tourism branch that we contract with the city. I am going to bring you just the highlights. I don't want to take and read the entire report because you have that in front of you, but this is just for the first quarter for 21-22 fiscal year. So I have in front of you, city councilors have it, and now you can see it on your screen. I am just going to highlight a couple of things that were a little surprising, but I'm grateful, and that's our lodging. And so every year we get reports from Travel Oregon that give us an indication of what that percentage of lodging is. And that's your occupancy, how much the rooms are going for, and where we are for Wasco County. We just happen to know that the sampling for that is right out of the Dalles. So even though it represents Wasco County, we happen to know all the hotels that they're working with are the Dalles proper. So you can see the comparisons up on your screen or on the report in front of you that for July of 21-22, we were at 86.8%. Surprisingly, compared to 2019-20 year, which was a banner year for our visitation, our tourism, and all of those, we were at 86.4%. So we actually rose a 0.4%. That's not big, but that is big considering that we're still in the end, we're hoping the end of this pandemic, and not everybody is out visiting yet, not everybody is touring yet, and yet our hotel occupancy was higher than what it was in 2019. Then I want to reflect on, August we're down. There was fires going on. It was extremely warm in lots of those months, so that the heat doesn't have that factor, but there were some fires in that. And so that hinders, especially with the reputation we've had from fires for the previous years. People are hesitant as soon as they know that they're happening in the gorge because they don't want to get stuck in the gorge. September, we actually went up 1.5%, so a whole percent higher than what we were in 19 and 20. So we're excited about that. We are hoping there's some correlation in what we did for special advertising on that. We did some special campaigns working with KATU in July. These are very expensive campaigns, but we felt that was a demographic and an audience and target that really were willing to travel to the Dalles. We just needed to get their attention. So we did an All About the Cherry for the entire month of July. We had paid for advertising and segments in their cooking section. So they focused on the cherries and different things, working with some of our suppliers here in town. We did All About the Cherry. They came and visited different locations, and including our attractions. We did some interviews on that piece of it. And so we paid probably about $10,000 to $11,000 total. It got us some amazing advertisement on several of their station and aspects and shows, and then doing those actually intense programs. And we were on their website. And then we're looking at some of our things. We did that heavy campaign in July. Then we did another heavy campaign, and it happened to be September. So both of those had rises in our lodging. We're not saying that this is the only reason, but we do feel like it might have helped, because right now in the entire world, everybody is competing for that tourist who's going to step off the plane or get in a car or get on their bicycle. No one was left untouched by this pandemic. So we are trying to be competitive and be out there and be ever present for the Dalles on that piece of it. The other highlights, we gave you our websites. We are still, the top 4 cities is still the Dalles, Portland, Hood River, and Seattle. They rotate every month. This is a quarterly summary, so you can see the ages and how many users are from those different cities. We are constantly trying to improve our social medias, and we have hired a new promotions person, William Bayless. And so he is working and playing catch up on both of our Instagram, our Facebook, and our YouTube, and then we'll be going out from there on a few different things. You've got our video spots. We did a summary for July, August, and September. We tried to break it up so you can kind of see how much promotion we did in July, how much promotion we did in September, and those are when our numbers were rising. So we're trying to find ways to continue to do that, but on a affordable budget, because those are pretty expensive endeavors, but we wanted to be out of the gate and help our businesses as much as we could. You also have a list of the articles that were published that we know of and doing those different things. I also included our regional mentions, and this is where I'm working with the Mount Hood Gorge region set by Travel Oregon. 2 of our big campaigns that happened was this Stiletzi and White Crane Hood Tier Loop on the Timber Trail. It has launched, and if you go to the link that was provided, you'll see how the Dalles is incorporated in that loop. So we're, as a region, trying to work with this organization on how can we actually emphasize each of the communities that are in there. We've also done that as a group. We launched it, I believe, a year ago, and I had reported it then. It is the Infinity Loop, and it is a map that actually hits all of the communities in the Hood Gorge region and encourages visitors to hit those different highlights of that whole region. Top Chef happened to come, and they worked with our region's producers and different things. The Dalles was not directly highlighted in the show, but anytime we can bring attention to the region, our region is make sure that we are present as far as the web presence and making sure that the Dalles is present in any of that verbiage. There's been several years that a campaign was done in the region, and the Dalles was a highlight and other communities were not. So we try to shift it. But Lizzie, our regional RDMO, she is really good about making sure that all names are present and represented. So the exciting fun piece that we got to do is, everybody's familiar with Discovery Channel. Well, the program Extinct or Not, Extinct or Alive from Animal Planet came to the Dalles. They happened to know a person that was here, and that was the reason they came, but we found out, so we made sure that they got an amazing welcome, and we got to work with their team, and we just had a lot of fun, and their program will air January, February, or March, around there. We'll keep you posted. But that is actually a 10-foot sturgeon right here out of the dock, not too far from the dock area from the port of the Dalles. So that is here. That is his wife. We saw her take a dive because the tail whipped her so much. She is a tiny thing, and that was not. So they had an amazing time. They could not believe it. They've never been welcomed by any of their communities that they've filmed in, which we were utterly surprised. We thought that was such a privilege to be able to host people. So they still are sending us notes and saying thank you for what we were able to do. And we've got some great photos to go with it. So we're excited about that program coming on. And we'll, like I said, we'll let you know as soon as it gets here. The other thing that's not in this report, because technically it's in the next quarter, but October, I was able to go down to California to a travel trade show, which is strictly just set up so people can come in and decide where they're going to take a vacation. I will be honest, that's a new concept for me. I have not gone shopping for where I'm going to go for a vacation. Maybe I should. It was kind of fun, and there was a lot of people who were inquiring about the Dalles. I was actually the only person representing the Hood Gorge region, and actually ended up representing Eastern Oregon. We only had so many staff in the booth, and we saw several hundred people each day that we were there, and I was able to talk and encourage them to come visit the Dalles. There was several people who had heard about us. They've bicycled around our area. They've come to fish around our area, and they just love the Columbia River. So they're looking forward to coming back. I will say the interesting thing was the Saturday guests were people who were going to drive to the Dalles and up into the Hood Gorge region, and they wanted to know the best things to do along the way. And the Sunday crowd, we have no idea how this worked out, were mostly people who were going to fly into Portland and wanted to know if there was car-free travel into the Dalles, which we were so excited that we could tell them, yes, we have car-free travel. So that is what I have for just the highlights for you. Is there questions?
Any questions for Lisa? I don't see any hands. Councilor Long.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't so much a question, which is why I was waiting to see if anybody else had a question. But I just wanted to thank Lisa for the comprehensive report that was in the packet. And so I would encourage people in the public to go ahead and take a look at that, because there's a lot more information there than she shared with us. And I just want to point out that I can really see the continuity of what you've been doing and building, even pre-pandemic, working with the shows and greeting people. And I think it's been, I have my own business, and it's been very hard to keep an upbeat, positive, energetic attitude. And I can really see that in the numbers and with what you chose to do with the money. And it probably, looking back, it looks great, but I also want to acknowledge the risk that you probably felt like you were taking at the time. And that's a pretty scary thing. And so I just want to say thank you for representing the Dalles the way you have.
Thank you, Darcy. That does mean a lot. And yes, there is a risk. It is scary during the pandemic. Do I do this or not? Do I bring visitors? Do we want visitors? You know, it was such an up in the air, but we have to do it so far ahead of time. So I have an amazing team. We have an amazing community, folks. It's phenomenal in what we offer, but it's also that wonderful, true feel of that small town community that offers a lot. So you guys make it easy for me to promote. You really do. And I'm looking forward. We're always looking for the next angle and whichever show that we can bring and bring us a little bit more exposure for the bang for the dollar. And so I am looking forward to seeing some more lodging reports, and I will keep you appraised of how we're doing in that trend compared to where we were at 2018. I'm hopeful that it will continue to match or be, fairly close to the 2019 numbers. So that's what we're looking at for predictions. So if there's no more questions, thank you guys so much. You have an amazing evening.
Let me make sure there is no other questions. Anybody?
Okay, sorry.
Any counselor have a question? Last call. Okay, Lisa, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate the report, and I'm sure we'll be, you do this quarterly, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see you in 3 months, if not before.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Item 6 on the agenda is audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. Up to 5 minutes per person will be allowed. If a response by the city is requested, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. The issue may appear on a future meeting agenda for city council consideration. Citizens are encouraged to ask questions with the understanding that the city can either answer the question tonight or refer the question to the appropriate city staff, who will get back to you within a reasonable amount of time. Is there anyone who would like to address the city council for up to 5 minutes on anything that is not on the agenda? Ms. Leanne Lewis, please go ahead. You have up to 5 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I shouldn't take less than 5 minutes. I am behind Lisa. She's a professional. I am not. So it's my first time. I want to talk about the 2 homes that are being built on one lot. It is directly behind my house. Darcy, Rich, and Lisa I think it's Alice, have all been to my home to see the situation behind my property. I have a 1/4 acre lot. The whole entire fence line is all home, which means there are 2 decks being built, and the decks completely overlook my property. I have 0 privacy in my backyard. It looks the 2 decks look directly into 2 bedrooms and a playroom. So the problem is there's no privacy, and I did go over the LUDA rules. I guess this was brought up in 2017, 2018 as to why people did not want 2 homes being built on one piece of property. I saw the article 6.0.10 landscape standards. And you will see there's quite a few standards of allowing me to have privacy. So I would like it implemented with city force to build I'd like to have plants, evergreen, 16-foot tall, squished together. So it's a total barrier to allow me to have privacy. I think cable decking should not be allowed because I have pictures of pit bulls that bark at me and my family when we are outside because the pit bulls look right into our yard. And if there was a solid fence like our neighbors of the solid decking, then it allows for sound barrier and for the dogs, pit bulls, not being able to see us. So it alleviates that problem as well. You can also hear the pit bulls barking at people that are crossing on the front crosswalk in front of their house. They're that loud. It's awful. You can see all of their junk on their deck, and it's a huge deck. It's probably 20 feet long. So it's all this garbage everywhere, and unorganized, and it's awful. I have invited everyone. I sent out an email, including the fire marshal, to come and see these two homes. The roof line practically touches like 5 feet or 4 feet, which is a fire hazard. I think that the Dalles vision is losing itself with allowing these homes being squished together, and it's a huge fire hazard for everybody in the town. This is supposed to be a community town, it's not the city, it's not Portland. There's land here. I don't feel like what's happening is the vision of what the Dalles should be doing. It's really awful. I still invite all of you come and see for yourself. Pictures do not give it justice as to how awful it really is. And the guy, he walks around naked inside his house. He has no blinds. You can't get away from it. So if there are minors in this house, the blinds here are open, and there's nowhere to get out of it. You can't get away from it. So I'm just requesting a couple of things be for sure implemented and modified and enforced, with the wall of trees, 16 feet high, smashed together, solid wall decking, no cable decks. That the cabling is a huge problem. You can't get away from the visual of all the junk and the dogs. There is garbage everywhere in the back of where they're building. It's piled high, and they've already been called in by the city of how much garbage they had out on the sidewalk. They were enforced. It was enforced. I haven't been up there recently, and it was piles. So I know you want me to end this. So if anyone has any questions, please ask me. And I have done a lot of research. I have lots of pictures. I'm happy to show on my cell phone right now. I can just quickly whip it up so you can see what I'm talking about, or do come by.
Okay.
That's all I have right now.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure I understand. You're asking the city council to amend their code, the city code. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Enforcement, specifically enforce the rules, the LUDA rules of privacy specifically.
Okay. If we are to interpret the code the same way you do, we'd have to get a legal opinion, or at least an opinion from the city staff. And if you have a suggestion on amending the code, I would suggest you draft something and get it to our Director of Community Development for our consideration. And I would also, at this point, like to encourage any member of the city council to visit Ms. Lewis at her address. And I'm sure I think she did provide that for you in her email. So thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Okay. And so to the couple of city council members I never heard from, I would like for you to show up. I think it's very important visually to see what is happening and is going to continue to happen in the city.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Steve Lawrence? She's going to unmute you, Steve. Hang on.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Steve Lawrence, 2017 View Court. I inquired a little while ago about the bike kiosk that I thought was designed and going to be implemented down at Lewis and Clark Park. I have been told that that has been sort of set aside and is not something that is being planned presently. So I took a look at the highway trail that's coming through the gorge, which will bring bicycles to the Dalles sometime in 23, 24. I know that's quite a ways away because they have to do Mitchell Point and they have to do some other things, but to not plan to have a good, effective kiosk design, which we committed to a number of years ago, I think is short-sighted. And I would like to have the council again address the issue of what they're going to do to welcome cyclists who are going to come in on this gorge trail, and to make sure that we're ready to receive them.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I would suggest this commitment may have preceded most of us that are on the council, unless anybody has a comment or question. Councilor McLaughlin?
No, I do remember it, and I support the kiosk, and I think we should circle around and take a look at this once again and see where we are. I know COVID may have paused some of the activity moving forward, but I still think it's vital for our city to have something for cyclists to come to.
Thank you. Councilor Richardson?
I will second what Councilor McLaughlin just said. And in fact, I would see one kiosk and raise you a bit of signage. I think we probably need some signage at before Lewis and Clark, probably at the Discovery Center, where the trail kind of takes a dog leg or will, and possibly a little bit farther along. So yes, absolutely. I think it's a very good point.
I was going to ask the staff if they had any comment. I see Daniel Hunter is raising his hand. So Mr. Hunter.
Mayor Mays, to answer or address Councilor Richardson's request for signs, these gorge hubs were designed in coordination with other communities along the Columbia River from Fairview to the Dalles, and they all include not only the kiosks themselves, but in the kiosks are maps of where each hub is in each community and signage standards for each one. So if you go to any hub along the way, you've got a full map of where the other hubs are in each other in the other community.
Oh, good deal. Thank you.
Welcome.
Councilor Long?
Yes, I have a question of Mr. Hunter.
Yeah.
So is this on hold because of something the city is doing or not putting money toward it? Or is this because it's a larger project and there's something on hold that we don't control?
My understanding is it was not a funding priority in the last budget. And part of the reason for that is we're the last hub on this line. And although ours was at least estimated, I think it was in 2015 at just under 45,000 to complete, Mosier's hub is over $1 million, and they're working on getting theirs completed. So it's thought if Mosier's isn't completed, then the Dalles finishing theirs kind of leaves Mosier out of the loop. And so.
Okay, so it's not so much that we said we're not going to do this or we're not prioritizing it, but maybe we were being a little strategic, but we've been reminded now that we need to be looking to what budget that's going to go into.
Correct.
Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Lawrence?
There's one additional factor in contacting the coordinator for ODOT for this project. She indicates that she can inform city governments of potential additional funding.
Councilor McLaughlin?
Mr. Lawrence, in addition to the kiosk, I remember a repair facility, maybe a repair area in that proposal, so that there was a place to repair bikes when they reached. Is that part of my recollection of that?
That's correct. There was a bigger facility than what is there now, and it was supposed to have wayfinding. It was supposed to have facilities to repair. It was supposed to have even the possibility of water restoration for people who have needed to fill up their water tanks, etc. So it's a design that was approved and uniformly accepted up and down the gorge. So it's readily available if the city wants to go back and look at that. And it's very usable. What I'm afraid is that if we don't act, if we're not proactive, that the riders, the bicycle riders, are basically going to end at Hood River.
And we don't want that,
No,
but we want to have a welcoming situation in the Dalles. And basically it would be the end of that trail, wouldn't it?
correct.
All right. And
And,
It's a
and
great-
by the way, if you recall, we kind of got in a discussion with Dan DeRoe about extending it further east from Lewis and Clark Park. And he reminded us at the time, which changed my opinion, that in fact, people will ride in from Bend and come at us from the other direction. So we can expect riders from both directions, and which even heightens, I think, the emphasis needed for a functional kiosk.
so
Okay.
my question comes back. Who is going to look into this matter? And who's going to spearhead and give us information and updates?
I'd like to ask Mr. Hunter to, when our city manager returns to work, maybe this is something that would be part of the budget discussion and go in the city budget. Is that okay with you, Mr. Hunter?
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan to me. We'll work on including it in next fiscal year budget.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
I
you.
agree.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Any other citizens that would like to address the city council for up to 5 minutes? Last call, seeing nothing or hearing nothing. It's time for reports. Mr. Hunter, city manager's report.
Nothing really to report. I would like the consensus of the council. We've got 55 city employees. The vast majority of them are public works whose CPR certification has lapsed due to inability to get refresher training during COVID. And we've identified a possibility to have those employees trained at Columbia Gorge Community College going through their program. The cost of that was not budgeted in my budget, so I'm asking for what would be a total of $4,015 out of the SAFE funds that are budgeted in council's budget for safety related items to get those employees trained.
And how many employees is this?
55.
50. Oh, wow. So we can get 55 people trained for $4,000.
Correct.
Councilor Long?
Yeah, so are any of those people who have never been certified before, or are they all recertifications?
There may be a few that have not been trained before. The vast majority of them have been trained before, but their training has expired because each certification only lasts 2 years.
Right. So I am going through a process with a local organization, and they have a much less expensive option to be trained online if you have held a certification in the past, even if it's expired.
Okay.
So, of course, I'm in favor of you taking the community college route if that's what needs to happen. But I would also like a chance to at least point you in the direction of something that may be more cost effective.
Okay. I can talk to you tomorrow about it.
Absolutely.
Okay, do we have a consensus from the city council to proceed according to Councilor Long's suggestion, and whether that turns into something productive or not, to go ahead with the community college?
Save money first, yes. If not, community college.
Anybody have any objection to that? Okay, thank you. Proceed, please, Mr. Hunter. Anything else?
That was it.
Okay, council reports. We'll start with the upper left-hand corner. And that would be Councilor Runyon.
I see myself in the lower middle. And I've tried to find, usually there's a place where I can type my name in, but it does not appear to be on the computer tonight. Reports.
We all know who you are.
It sounds like a personal problem to me.
As long as I don't play any infectious music or put videos on, we're okay.
Right.
Q Life meeting in the last week, and several things are going on in general to say that internet connections throughout the community are going to continue to expand and be completed. Some of those are not ready for prime time to talk about yet, but we'll have reports in the near future. So that was a Q Life meeting. I met with the Main Street director, Victoria Davis, for about an hour and a half, possibly. and productive meeting, a very sharp young lady. I met by phone with our planning and community development director, Alice Cannon, about some of the issues that are out there, including the one that the citizen was talking about. I have been making calls and whatnot on that. Let's see, several calls today with citizens and through the weekend. So that's my report.
Thank you. Councilor Randall.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. I also met with Victoria Davis, Main Street Director, and also received several emails and phone calls regarding tonight's discussion item, which is the fate of the Waldron Drugstore building. And met with the mayor for an update briefing on the SIP agreement. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Long.
Yes, so I attended a housing webinar that was sponsored by Mid-Columbia Economic Development. And it was Jason Dietz, who's the housing director from Summit County in Colorado. And it was some very interesting things. I also saw Director Cannon on that as well. So I'm sure she's got some ideas, but that was very informational and interesting. I also met with Tori Davis from the Dalles Main Street, and I was very impressed with her. And her project management background is, I believe it's going to give us more measurable outcomes, which I am very excited about. I'm excited for the direction she's looking. And like everybody else, I attended the work session regarding the city manager hiring process, and I met with the mayor, as well as taking lots of calls and emails regarding the Waldron, and then also the issue at Miss Lewis's house regarding privacy and the ADU being so large. And that's my report.
Thank you. Councilor McLaughlin.
I also met with Tori at Main Street. I've been getting calls on the Waldron Drug and following up on that as well. I'm sorry I missed the Lewis issue, and I'll circle around and take a look at that. I'm not certain the details on that. Other than that, I've been busy receiving calls and attending a retirement tonight for Scott McKay. That was held prior to this meeting. And that's what I've been doing those last couple of weeks.
Thank you. Councilor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Much the same as everybody else. Several conversations with residents about the Waldron building. A briefing with yourself about Google funding allocation and process. The city manager recruitment work session with council last Monday, and a fruitful meeting also with Victoria Davis at Main Street.
Thank you. The only thing I'm going to add is you've all heard many of the things that I've been up to from the other counselors. I just want to highlight Tori Davis is, I think, a breath of fresh air for this community. And I also attended the retirement party for Scott McKay tonight at just an hour before the council meeting. And we're all going to miss Scott a lot. He's done a lot of great things for this community. And I think it was an honor for Tim and I to be asked to speak about it, to speak at the party.
I'm not sure he felt the same way, but we brought up some old stories that I don't know if he appreciated, but it was fun.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Runyon.
I probably forgot, I did forget the work session for the city manager should have been in there. And also I forgot your meeting. We met for quite a while. Don't want to leave you out of the list, but for anybody who thinks city councilors only show up twice a month for these meetings, it is not the case, as you can tell from everyone's report. There's something all the time.
Thank you, Councilor. Item 9 is the consent agenda. Items of a routine and non-controversial nature are placed on the consent agenda to allow the city council to spend its time and energy on the important items and issues. Any councilor may request that an item be pulled from the consent agenda and be considered separately. Items pulled from the consent agenda will be placed on the agenda at the end of the action items section. Tonight, we have 6 items on the consent agenda. First, approval of the regular city council meeting of November the 8th. Second is the approval of the regular city council minutes from November 22nd. We also have two items declaring surplus property within the police department. We also have the approval of an issuance of funds to the Columbia Gorge Community College for the city's share of the construction of the Skills Center that has recently been completed on their campus. And finally, we have the approval of an amendment to the Operations Management International Agreement to operate our wastewater treatment plant for fiscal year 21-22. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
McLaughlin will second.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilor Long and seconded by Councilor McLaughlin to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, item 10A on the agenda is a public hearing. Now is the time for a public hearing to receive testimony regarding General Ordinance Number 21-1388, an ordinance amending sections 10.2.030, 10.5.060.030, and 10.5.070.020 of the Dalles Municipal Code, Title 10, Land Use and Development. I will open the public hearing and ask for a staff report. Following the staff report, I will call for testimony for support of the issue, followed by testimony in opposition of the issue. At the conclusion of the testimony, the public hearing will be closed and the matter will be turned over to the City Council for deliberation and a decision. So with that, I'm now opening the public hearing. I'd like to ask for a staff report, and I'm assuming that would be from Ms. Dawn Hurt. Is that correct?
So tonight, Director Alice Cannon will be presenting.
Oh, my mistake. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Mayor and members of council, I will be sharing a screen here momentarily. I just clicked away from it, so let me pull that up.
We can see your email, Alice.
Oh, oh boy. Okay, so I need to click out of that and get you back here. Let's do that.
I had not quite finished reading one of those emails.
Well, I was catching them too. They were interesting.
Okay, I'm going to stop share and I'm going to try again. Oh my goodness. That's the worst.
What time was the ice cream party?
All right. Let me get the slideshow going. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We are here this evening. I have Dawn Hurt with me, and she has been working steadily on this project. So lots of thanks to her for her good work on this project from the very beginning. Also helping her was Caitlin on our planning staff, Caitlin Cook, who's one of our planners. So this evening we have a zoning ordinance text amendment that the intention of this goes back to a goal setting session that you had last January, where you identified a goal to have our code recognize the land use of shelter housing. We didn't previous to this. In fact, currently we do not recognize that land use in our code. So if someone wanted to do it, we don't have standards in place, nor do we have any direction on an appropriate location for such land uses inside of our city. So with that, we went to work on this proposal and identified a few areas where it's allowed. I also want to say that during this time period, after we started the project, Governor Brown and the whole state of Oregon has been working a lot on the issue of how to provide temporary shelter housing for our homeless population statewide. We do have a housing shortage, what is recognized as a housing crisis in our state, and actually all up and down the West Coast. So with that, we went to work on this locally, but also our governor did. And in the legislative session and signed by the governor in May, there was a bill that requires local governments to allow shelter housing inside the urban growth boundary anywhere. So currently that is in place, and that is for emergency shelter housing. So if one of those shelters comes into place before the sunset period of June 30th of 2022, so coming up next year, that will remain. It can be located anywhere inside the urban growth boundary. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that, but our intent is to make sure that we have some code in place that will be in place when that important legislation sunsets later in June of 2022. So with that, I'm going to launch right into what our proposal is. So we're asking you to amend the Dalles Municipal Code Title 10 to allow as a permitted use in the commercial general and commercial light industrial zone to allow shelter housing identified as established and seasonal shelters as permitted uses subject to proposed standards that are identified in the packet. So all the properties, which properties does it apply to? I'm going to move on to the next slide. We've identified some landmarks that you will recognize. The area that is pink is the CG zone, which is general commercial. And then we have the gray property is identified as CLI or commercial light industrial. So we're saying that as a staff, we're recommending that these uses are most appropriate in these areas, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have at the end of this presentation about that. We did take this to our planning commission, and we had a very thoughtful discussion with our planning commission about the best way to regulate this land use. And at the November 18th Planning Commission public hearing, the commission agreed with a majority of staff's recommendations. However, the commission made 3 modifications to the proposed code amendments. For both established and seasonal shelters in the general commercial zone, those were removed from the list of permitted uses and moved to the list that would require a conditional use permit at a hearing before the planning commission. So it would require a public hearing prior to approval in the general commercial area, general commercial district, which I'll go back to here, is identified by pink on the map. Okay. And also required, and I thought this was a very good suggestion, bathing facilities required for both seasonal and established shelters. And a requirement for shade trees to be a required element in and around these established shelters. And again, a very good suggestion. And we will, looking forward to, if this comes in, making sure that we have appropriate landscaping and that we can, I guess, mitigate for the impacts of heat. If there's heat and if it's a hot day, that we have better shade for the residents of these shelters. So with this is the very formal part of our hearing tonight. We did a review to ensure conformance with the zoning ordinance text amendments criteria. And we did find that this amendment is consistent with our comp plan and state laws, administrative rules, and the state transportation planning rule. And moving into the Dalles comprehensive plan, we found concurrence with goal number 1 for a citizen involvement program, land use planning, and then the housing goals inside our comprehensive plan. And this is a very short presentation because we expect that you've already gone through, and we did have a work session with you in July to discuss this proposal and all of the associated standards. So with that, I want to offer up for consideration by the council. Planning Commission made the recommendation, and that was to move to adopt General Ordinance number 21-1388, amending 3 sections in Title 10, Land Use and Development Ordinance, which we identified in an earlier slide. Another option is to decline the adoption of this. And then lastly, move to direct staff to modify this ordinance to allow shelter housing to be permitted outright in the CG general commercial zone. Of course, you can make other amendments to the standards as you see fit, but these are the three council alternatives. And that is the end of our slideshow at this time. Happy to answer any questions and also move around to different slides as you see fit.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon. Now is the time in the public hearing to receive some testimony. The first one would be testimony in support of the proposed ordinance. Would anybody like to speak in support of the proposed ordinance? Now is your chance. Anybody? Okay, seeing and hearing nothing, we'll move to testimony in opposition. Would anybody like to testify in opposition to the proposed ordinance?
Mayor Mays, this is Kenny LaPointe with Mid-Columbia Community Action.
Yes, Mr. LaPointe, please go ahead.
Mayor, thank you for having me, council members. Appreciate all the work that's been done to develop a shelter siting ordinance for the city. I think it's really important as we work to address the housing needs of our community members to have the ability to establish shelter within the city. As you all know, my agency, Mid-Columbia Community Action Council, runs the pallet shelter site in the Dalles. We also recently received $1.5 million from the Oregon legislature to build a navigation center in the city. And that navigation center will be the future home of our shelter facility as well as our agency's offices. In the recommended ordinance update, there is one concern that we do have. First of all, we do value the recommendations that are included in the ordinance, including landscaping, basic siting, design standards. Those are all things that we very much value as an agency. And when we build this navigation center, we plan to build a state-of-the-art facility that looks great in the community and provides dignity to folks who are experiencing houselessness. The one concern we do have, though, is the requirement for a conditional use permit in general commercial zones. Going through a conditional use permit process, especially if a land use board of appeals appeal is tied to it, can be very costly and puts us at risk of loss of funding due to timelines not being able to be met. I have provided written public comment to the council on this topic for more detail, but I recommend that the permitting process allow for outright use in general commercial zones, as well as the commercial industrial light zones as well, so that we can ensure that these facilities are built to standards in the community and we're able to better serve community members. We don't want to lose these valuable resources that have been provided for our community. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. LaPointe. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition to this proposed ordinance? Okay, I think that after I close the public hearing, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to ask questions by the city council. Okay, last call for any comments from the public. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay, now is the time for council deliberation. Does the city council have any questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, I have a few questions.
Okay, Councilor Richardson and then Councilor Long.
Thank you. Director Cannon, these questions are for you, and I will stipulate right up front that had I a few more days in the week, I would have done more advanced research on this and gotten some of these answers sooner, but be that as it may. I see there are no staffing ratios discussed in the proposed ordinance. Was that discussed at all at the Planning Commission?
I don't, I think that what we asked for was an operational plan as well as 24-hour contact information for staff. But as far as making sure we require that there be someone available, staffing, I believe that's in the standards, but not having ratios, that is not defined in the code.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's something that would be worth thinking about or looking into? Or do you feel like that's covered somewhere in code that I'm just not familiar with?
Mayor Mays, Councilor Richardson, I think that as far as getting these types of details in the land use code, I think that can be difficult for us to enforce at a later time. However, getting an operational plan is very appropriate in making sure we understand who we can reach and how many residents and all the details that get included in that plan. I think that's appropriate.
Okay. One question from the ordinance, another question about the ordinance itself. It allows shelters to be opened. This is under section O, point A, point I, point 2, which is page 49 of the council packet. It allows shelters to be operated by one or more of the following, including a religious corporation as defined by ORS. I'm wondering if there's any wisdom in perhaps thinking about adding a line there about a religious corporation, maybe that's been in existence for some period of time, 2 years or 3 years, just as the public benefit corporation, also in the same section, is required to. In other words, would it make sense for us to say, sure, a religious organization can run a homeless shelter, but it's got to be a religious corporation that's been around a little while, as opposed to one that's perhaps started up purely for this purpose?
Mayor Mays, Councilor Richardson, what we did is we borrowed generously. This came right out of state law. So this particular section, and we borrowed from House Bill 2006. And so what you will see on that page is it says be established and seasonal shelters shall be operated by one or more of the following: a local government, an organization with at least two, if you go to section 2, organization with at least 2 years experience operating low income housing programs or reasonable equivalent, and is either a local housing authority, a religious corporation, or a public benefit corporation. So the way I read this is that the religious corporation needs to have that housing experience just as a public benefit or a housing authority might. So that is covered well. State law reads a little more strictly than that. We lightened it up because we heard from state housing leaders that the bar was too high for rural Oregon. There were too few organizations that provide shelter housing. So we added the language operating low-income housing as opposed to shelter housing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A little more careful reading might have caught that on my part. Thank you. Is there, to your knowledge, Director Cannon, are there any pending shelter plans or applications that you're aware of, not counting the navigation center that's been mentioned already?
Councilor Richardson, no, I'm not aware of any others.
Last question I have is directly related to Kenny's point about requesting us to modify the ordinance and allow outright use in the general commercial zone. I'm wondering if there's a way to sort of split the difference, essentially. Is there a mechanism, or is it possible to maybe forego the, or find an alternate to the conditional use permit approach to forego the planning commission and the, the potential appeal to Ludo, but require a vote of city council in this very narrow circumstance.
I suppose, Councilor Richardson, you can do almost anything you want with code. However, that kind of arrangement isn't traditional in our code. And generally, I like the ability for, personally, I like the ability for city council to be, you don't specialize in this area. So on a regular basis in land use, and you appoint a group of citizens called the Planning Commission to hear land use issues. And so they're trained and they're accustomed to doing this. So it is something you can design, and Jonathan can answer that question more specifically. It would just be a one-off, and I personally wouldn't recommend that, but you can do whatever you please to do, and we'll follow a direction of a majority of this council.
Well, I've only been at this about a year, so I'm by far the least experienced of the other of the counselors. So if anybody else wanted to pipe in and give their wisdom, that would be appreciated.
Okay, we'll move. Is that it, Councilor Richardson?
That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councilor Long and then Councilor Runyon.
Yeah,
And
so.
then, okay.
So one thing I did want to say is that the first change that the Planning Commission made for the outright use to not be in there anymore, to make it a conditional use, I think that's one of those things that kind of gives us peace of mind and sounded good when I read it. But then when Mr. Lapointe pointed out the unintended consequence of us not being able to meet timelines in order to use the funding that we have, I think that's the major concern for me, because of course, ideally I would like to be some kind of public input to do this, but we really do have short turnaround times. And so, so I personally am in favor of going back to the way it was originally written on that one. And
Councilor Long,
mm-hmm.
you mind if I ask our city attorney a question pertaining to your statement?
No.
Mr. Kara, do you think that a conditional use requirement would increase the likelihood of a LUBA appeal as opposed to, say, a permitted use, which is kind of what Mr. Lapointe's point is?
Thank you, Mayor Mays. It seems the answer to your question is likely yes. Now, just because somebody has the right to assert a LUBA appeal, which applies to final land use decisions and limited land use decisions, doesn't mean that that claim has any merit. But as Mr. Lapointe raised here, even if a claim is without merit, it could still delay projects sometimes under some circumstances. If the concern is addressing the likelihood of a LUBA appeal on the city's approval or denial of a conditional use permit, then that's a concern worth addressing here tonight. At the close of the public hearing, we're in this deliberation phase where it's precisely the right question to be asking. I think ultimately it comes down to a question of it's a political question, not so much a legal one. But to answer your question of does it increase the chances? The answer is yes, because each and every approval or denial of a conditional use permit application for this type of shelter, like any other conditional use permit that the city considers through the application process, is a land use decision subject to appeal. But so is enacting this ordinance here tonight, which amends our land use code. And so the decision to approve and adopt this ordinance, because we're amending our LUDO, is also subject to appeal. And so it's a good question, but that's sort of the answer that I think that comprehensively answers it without also answering it.
Well, I think you did answer it, actually. Thank you very much. And thank you, Councilor Long, for allowing me to interrupt. So please proceed.
No, that's great. We need to get all the information in a way that makes sense. So another point that I would like to make on that same, for the reasoning behind it, is that this particular change is regarding something that I would consider an urgent, maybe even emergency situation. So it's a little bit different if someone needs shelter. It's very time sensitive. It's not quite the same as some other types of buildings. And so, you know, if we don't build, if we don't have a place for people to sleep, then they're going to be outside. And so I think the urgency is important. The other thing is I felt that because the bathing facilities are covered back in that section that Councilor Richardson brought to our attention on page 49, it says that right straight from the state, shelter housing established in seasonal shelters shall provide sleeping, bathing, restroom facilities for clients. Now, how I look at that is different than how putting it into this code. The land use code is different. So, for example, you could provide those facilities at another location. And so it's still available to people, but not necessarily at that physical location. And just from establishing the shelter that I did and running it, I would say that we didn't have access to a shower trailer. They're very expensive and they were also back ordered. So that could create a problem. And then it's also you'd have to have water available that you could tap into. And so that gets into a whole bunch of other issues. And I think, yes, for human rights, we definitely want people to have access to those things, but they're not the same as having toileting facilities where you need to have it right close to your housing. You could go a distance, or it could be provided transportation to that. I think there's other ways of satisfying that. And those are my comments.
Thank you. Councilor Runyon.
Okay, I too, as a former chair of Mid-Columbia Community Action and the one who chose to lead the expansion of our pallet shelters and so forth, as you may recall, I have an interest in all of this, but I also have some sympathy with Executive Director Lapointe about the timeline and so forth. At the same time, as Councilor Long mentioned, I have great respect for our planning commission, who has the time and expertise and really goes through the in-depth portions of these kinds of events. And I was a former city planning commissioner at one time, so I can understand that, I think, better than some. So what I would think, the planning commission had a very good reason, which I have not had a chance to read their entire presentation, the minutes from those meetings where they came to that conclusion. However, because of the timeline on this grant money, I would suggest that we put a temporary hold on that sentencing regarding the general commercial area that they have to go through the process, blah, blah, blah. Put a temporary hold on till I would say July 31st, at which point we would re-examine it again at that point with all the tools in hand and decide whether that should go forward or stay off of it. And that would give the Mr. Lapointe and his organization the opportunity to get this project going and hopefully completed by the end date of the legislation. So that's what I'm offering as an option, to temporarily put a hold on that piece of requiring a hearing before the planning commission for conditional use permits until July 31 of whatever year that was. Is that 23? Yeah, 2023. That's an idea there, and Mr. Kara may have an idea if that's possible or not.
Are you talking about the House bill that was passed by the legislature?
Talking about, yeah, and being able to meet that date and not going necessarily against our planning commission, but asking for a temporary hold on that piece that they thought was important until July 31 of 2023. What would you think about that, Mr. Kara? To revisit it at that time.
That's a complicated question, Councilor Runyon.
That's the only kind I know. And my name's on my square now. I can answer questions too.
Could you ask it one more time?
I just simply want to delay the condition of obtaining a conditional use permit approval at a hearing before the planning commission, whether we include that into the ordinance effective July 31
Sure.
of
Okay.
2023 they'd have to come before the city council again.
So,
at that,
okay, I hear you. Thank you for
a temporary
saying it one more time.
temporary
Yeah.
hold.
So, two things. The first is I believe that the Oregon bill expires with a sunset provision July 1st, 2022, which is in about 6-7 months. And so before I get to the second point, I wanted to just confirm that with you. Would you still like to see us to explore that idea with the understanding that this is going to happen in about 6 or 7 months, as opposed to, 18 months?
Well, I'm reading on page 2 of Mr. LaPointe's letter, and it says timelines defined in legislation, parentheses, June 30th, 2023. So is that the date that we need to worry about, or is it a date sooner?
Mayor,
I'd rather take the latter date if possible.
Let me ask Director Cannon to clarify something. Go
just
ahead.
the clarification that the legislation that Mr. LaPointe is referring to is different than the House Bill 2006. So he is really referring to July 31st, 2023. And if it were me, and I'm going to jump in here, Mr. Kara, and suggest that the way to implement what Councilor Runyon is asking for would be to simply pass the ordinance without the conditional use requirement, and then have staff come back, say in May, and do a work session with the council and ask if you'd like to amend that section of the code at that time.
That works as well.
That works for me.
Speaking of 2006, I want to ask Ms. Cannon, sorry about that. As I understand your staff report and previous discussions we've had under House Bill 2006, which is due to expire, as you pointed out, this coming July, couldn't Mid-Columbia Community Action apply to place a homeless facility anywhere within the city? And wouldn't the city be required to approve it?
Yes, until it needs to be up and running by June 30th of 2022.
Okay, so, okay. I'm not saying he's doing us a favor by coming here and asking our permission regarding a conditional use permit versus a permitted use, but the fact is he could put this in right now up until 7 months from now, so.
Mayor, I think Don Hurt wants to say something.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Mayor Mayes. I just wanted to point out that the way that we have it written in the staff report and the special ordinance, a permitted outright use still is required to go through a site plan review. So this use could potentially be reviewed administratively and be appealed. And as I believe you stated, or Jonathan stated earlier, we have 120 days to render a final decision. So no matter whether it's administrative or a conditional use permit, there's still the process that it could potentially be appealed to the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council. So in terms of timelines, we're still bound by the 120 days, whether it's a conditional use permit or in a site plan review. If it's administrative, there's the potential that it may not end up going to a public hearing forum unless it's appealed.
When you say an appeal, it can be appealed by anybody.
That is any party of record. That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
So,
Councilor Runyon.
The bottom line, what I'm asking is I want to respect our planning commission for their work and deliberations. And I know that we have done as Ms. Cannon has suggested in the past on other ordinances where we have put a point in time, whatever that date is, where we come back and review it to see if we want to make changes, et cetera, like go ahead with this conditional use permit approval, that sort of thing. So that's all I'm trying to get to.
There's an additional, so Mr. Mayor, may I
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Just in final response to your question, Councilor Runyon, there's options, right? Nothing that we're talking about is prohibited by any law that I'm aware of. And so we can get flexible if whatever the council decides. An additional way to do what I think you're asking, if the city can, is to incorporate some language into this proposed ordinance that says for applications received prior to XYZ date, it shall follow this process. And for applications received by the planning department after this certain date certain, it will follow a separate process. So long as the objectives are, well, so long as the standards are clear and objective, it seems to be consistent with state law.
That sounds very good.
Yeah.
I don't know how we word it, but maybe you'll write something up.
No problem.
Okay. I'm just trying to incorporate the, Mr. Councilor Richardson's, Councilor Long's thoughts into something I'd been thinking about today after conversations that I had earlier with Ms. Cannon and trying to figure out a way that we could meet the needs of all. And I'd hate to see those funds that are sitting out there on the table, go somewhere else because we cannot get the deal done. So whatever works, but I think we should come back and review it at a date to be specified and see if we want to put that back into it.
Thank you, Counselor. Anybody, Counselor Richardson?
That sounds prudent to me, Mr. Mayor. Director Cannon, do you feel like that's a more reasonable or just plain reasonable way to go or not?
I think we can make that work. I think City Attorney Kara's suggestion is a good one, and we can move forward if that's the way the council wants to go.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Runyon.
Any other councilor comments or questions?
My questions have been answered, Mayor Mays, but it sounds like a workable plan to me, so I'm in favor of moving forward on that.
In order to move forward on that, would we need a motion tonight and a second and a vote, Mr. Kara? Or would this be something you could draft and bring back to our next meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Mays. Yes, so it would be something that a motion tonight per Ms. Cannon's number 3 staff recommendation from her PowerPoint would be sufficient to something along those lines to move to approve this ordinance with the understanding that it'll be modified. And so more than likely, the best bet, if the council's in general consensus to move on, this is something that staff can bring back at the next meeting after publishing a written notice of the ordinance pursuant to the charter. Any substantive amendments to proposed ordinances must be available in writing to the public before the meeting. And it's something that we can push out as an action item at the next meeting without a public hearing, since the public hearing on this was closed just a few minutes ago, where we can present it. Director Cannon can present it and show off the language that we think might work best, and take any final input from the council and go from there. So for tonight, I think informal consensus is sufficient for now. And since the public hearing is closed, I'm not certain that we need anything additional at this point.
Councilor Long.
Yeah, so I just want to circle back before we take a vote on that and just circle back to the bathing facilities issue and whether or not we're going to require them to be at the actual shelter site or whether we're going to let the shelter operator follow state law and perhaps have it at a different location.
What was the number on that on page 49?
Oh, sorry, page 44, and at the top, number 2, where it says bathing facilities, that's where they're saying those are the changes. And then if you go to 49, it's right at the top where it says under shelter housing, and it's the second thing down under the small I. And this is the part that Director Cannon said was cut and paste directly from state law.
But it doesn't say at the location, at that specific location. It just says they need to be provided. So I think it meets what you're talking about.
But what is put forth by the planning commission, the ordinance in front of us, is actually more restrictive. And I would like it to not be more restrictive. So I'm asking, can we make that change when we send it back to staff? So that when it comes back to us, it's clear that it's not in there prohibiting.
I'm sorry, Councilor Long, you want us to ask staff to modify the language so that someone could operate a shelter without bathing facilities on site, but somewhere else connected with the operation somehow?
Yes, but the easiest way to do that would be to strike the change that the planning commission proposed, and because they put that in, and so it wasn't in there
Yeah.
before, and so the end result would be that it could be somewhere else. And I completely respect the planning commission, but just no offense, but none of them have run a shelter or tried to put one together, and I have. So I'm just saying, I think it's better for the city if we don't make things too complicated for this urgent situation.
So
I would suggest that Councilor Long's suggestion could be agreed to through the same way we're agreeing to Councilor Runyon's suggestion. And that would be a consensus of the city council to direct Mr. Kara to make both those changes and bring it back. Mr. Kara?
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll have to consult with planning staff as to whether our land use code can allow us to regulate offsite activities. So, as a general ordinance that amends our LUDO has very specific requirements. It applies to private parcels of land throughout the city. And so when we apply design standards or planning standards to any singular parcel, we're applying it to a singular parcel. And so when we start talking about having offsite ad hoc bathing facilities and regulating that existence through our land use code.
No, that's not what I'm proposing.
Please go ahead.
What I'm proposing is to go back to the original proposal that went before planning commission before they made the alteration, adding the language about the bathing facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So our land use would not say anything about where the shower facilities the bathing facilities need to be. We don't need to comment on that because state law deals with that.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, take it back out.
I see.
That sounds reasonable to me. Okay.
Do you feel comfortable with that, Mr. Kara? Or is that something you think you need to research or talk to Ms. Cannon about?
I think I'm happy to work this through with planning staff, no problem, so long as we have sufficient direction. So thank you for clarifying that, Councilor Long. If we can do it, we'll submit it at the next city council meeting. And if not, I'll tell you why not.
That sounds
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, does any member of the city council feel we do not have a consensus to move forward as been explained and summarized? And the staff, you feel you have sufficient direction to bring something back on January 10th on both issues?
I do.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
That puts an end to the discussion on this item. Thank you all very much. Very good discussion. And thank you, Mr. Lapointe, for coming. Okay. Item 11A on the agenda. Is a utility underground feasibility study contract proposal. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mayor Mays and members of City Council. This is for a underground feasibility study for the downtown utilities. Previously, north or central or northwest North Wasco County PUD, excuse me, issued a request for proposals. They received one proposal from Stoddard Electric, and that proposal to do this analysis or feasibility study was at $72,177. We had previously budgeted $40,000 for this project, and if council approves the budget resolution later in the meeting, then we would have enough funds in the budget to complete this feasibility study. And Stoddard Electric has substantial experience in this area of the industry and has done work previously with Northern Wasco County PUD. Staff's recommendation is to authorize city manager to enter an agreement with Stoddard Power Systems to complete the downtown feasibility of downtown utilities.
Any questions for Mr. Hunter? Councilor McLaughlin.
Not for Mr. Hunter, but for Finance Director Wilson. Do we have $32,177 in the line item contractual services for this project? Are there sufficient funds?
Mr. McLaughlin, yes, we do actually have that money available in our contingency funds that later on I'll be requesting that we do a transfer of funds, the $32,000 to transfer over from the contingency fund line item. And that contingency fund line item after the transfer of $32,000 will still leave us with $811,453 in our contingency line item.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Could you repeat that? What's that amount in contingency that would be left?
Currently, right now, we have $843,630 in our contingency, and after the requested transfer of $32,177, we'll have $811,453.
Thank you. I thought you said 800,000. Okay, any other questions or comments? Is there anybody in the audience who would like to address the city council regarding this issue? Okay, I'm looking. Mr. Nichols, are you raising your hand? Okay, please unmute Mr. Nichols. She's getting it, Roger. Hang on. There you go. You're still muted, Roger.
I put this picture behind myself to show how it used to look back in the old days with all the lines up ahead. And just thought it would be an indicator of how far we've come. We can keep going farther. Thank you.
I agree with that. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I'm looking for a motion.
Mayor Mays, I can go ahead and make the motion. I move to authorize the city manager to enter an agreement with Stoddard Power Systems to complete the downtown utility underground feasibility study at a cost not to exceed $72,177.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second that.
Been moved by Councilor McLaughlin and seconded by Councilor Randall to authorize the city manager to enter into that agreement. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
McLaughlin, aye.
Runyon, aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 12A is a resolution approving a rate increase requested by the Dalles Disposal Service. Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Mayor Mays, and members of council. Received a proposed rate increase from Jim Winterbottom at the Dalles Disposal, of which is included with the staff report to you. Fairly straightforward, and we do this every year. So those of you may not be familiar, this is a process city council goes through annually. And I believe Jim is on with us. So if you have any questions, he's available. And it's staff's recommendation to adopt resolution number 21-031, approving the rate increase averaging approximately 5.05%, resulting from an increase in operational disposal fees incurred by the Dalles disposal effective January 1.
Mr. Winterbottom, do you have any brief comments you'd like to make?
No, Mr. Hunter summed it up pretty good, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the time to be on the agenda tonight. We used the West Coast CPI, which this year was 5.94. We're asking it for an 85% of that, which equates to the 5.05. I have examples of some increases that are, well over that currently operational cost, but no need to go into those unless you would specifically want me to.
Okay, anybody on the city council have any questions or would like to further information as Mr. Winterbottom has just suggested? Councilor Long.
Yep, I bring this up every year before we do this. And I do think that we need to see operational cost increases before we pass on an increase to our constituents. We owe them that much. We don't know whether or not it's really affecting the bottom line. No disrespect, Mr. Winterbottom, but I didn't know what the standard metropolitan statistical area West C was. So I looked that up, and really, I'm sorry, but it doesn't pertain to us. It's not rural, it's urban, and it refers to Portland, Vancouver, and Hillsborough. And it refers to a bunch of different things in the consumer price index, which actually don't necessarily affect the bottom line of the waste connections. And so before we approve an increase for people, we need to know whether or not that increase really needs to be passed along or what's going on. That's my thing.
I can address that, I think. We follow the Wasco County landfill on their increase, which they present, and we presented our increase back on October 7th to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And the Wasco County landfill has always used the standard metropolitan statistical area West 1982-84-100 for their rate reviews over the years. So we have shadowed that same number to remain consistent with what they're charging us. So their gate rate and the tipping fee is going up 85% of the 5.94 January 1. Our fuel is up 22%. The sheets of metal that we purchased to repair truck liners, truck bodies, drop boxes, and dumpsters in 2020, a 4x8 sheet of 10 gauge was $103.83. In 2021, that same sheet of 10 gauge steel was $310.08, up 198%. The dumpsters, the yard and a half dumpsters that you see around town at businesses, convenience marts, and gas stations. In 2020, a yard and a half dumpster, brand new, was $478. In 2021, the last order we had delivered was $663 each. That was up 38.7%. Wages, healthcare, all the items continue to rise. And to put it in perspective, because we are, sensitive to any increase, I understand that. A customer with a 32-gallon can is currently paying $18.80 a month. The increase would be 95 cents a month for that resident, or 22 cents per pickup. A customer that has a larger 90-gallon roll cart that we provide would see an increase of
So
$1.
it's not really about all those numbers, and yes, they're in the packet, but it's about your profit to loss ratio and whether or not what you're proposing is actually fair to the consumer compared to Waste Connections, whether that 5% needs to be passed along or if it should be less and still be reasonable. Because as long as I've been on council, first it was 2.3%, then it was over 3%, now it's over 5%. And each time I've asked staff to, specifically the city manager, to look into getting this reviewed before the next time that this comes up. And our previous auditors for financial, Marino and Company, they do audit waste management. So if we can't get the information directly from you before I agree to a price increase for our customers who are not getting increases in wages, I really have to know whether you really need that to continue to provide the service, or you need that so you can keep a nice profit margin for the owners of the business.
Okay, those aren't numbers that I have in front of me right now by any means, Councilor Kirk Long.
I ask every year.
Anybody else on the council have any questions or comments? Well, do you feel like, Councilor Long, that your questions, the staff can go back and do further research and we can bring this back? Is that what you're asking?
They can certainly try. I have no idea what information would be available to them from Waste Connections, but we previously have voted on increases in January rather than the December meeting. So I think there's no harm in going back and trying to get the information so that we as counselors can know if what we're doing to our constituents is fair.
Well, it seems to me we got two alternatives. We can go ahead and approve this, in which case I would suspect there's going to be at least one no vote. Or we can do as Councilor Long has suggested and have the staff work with Mr. Winterbottom to come back in January with more specific information. Is that, Councilor Long, I don't want to speak for you. Is that?
Yes, that's acceptable. Mhm.
Yeah. I think in order for them to do that, it might behoove you to, well, you say you've asked the staff this before, perhaps getting a list of questions together that are very specific to the issue may be helpful for the staff and Mr. Winterbottom to come back with some answers. So what does the other four want to do? Councilors, the other four city councilors? As I said, we can do one of two things. Go ahead and make a motion and vote on it, or do as Councilor Long is suggesting and have Mr. Winterbottom work with the staff and come back in January with more answers.
I would tend to support moving on the resolution. I understand what Councilor Long is saying about the passing those costs on to the consumer, but the businesses do have to operate. They do have to make a profit. Obviously, costs are going up all across the board. We see that when we go shopping, when we buy gas and so forth. So, yeah, I would support moving on the resolution.
Anybody else? Councilor or Mr. Kara, did you have something you wanted to say?
Thank you, Mayor Mays. Yes, it appears, the Dalles disposal has been operating in the city for a long time. We have a portion of our municipal code dedicated to the general ordinance granting the franchise to the entity. And one of the requirements is annually, I'm looking at my other screen here, March 31st of each year, submitting a financial statement to the finance director of the city that goes over specifically the numbers that Councilor Long is interested in. And so that's due in about 3 months for next year, but I'm sure we could take a look at the one from this year if council needs any further information that staff can provide to them. I think that's something that we can arrange if it was submitted as outlined in this ordinance. And so that specifically is going to cover, as it says here, the financial conditions of their operation, and it's open to the city at all times for inspection and must reflect the income, expenses, and general financial conditions of the entity. So hopefully that was helpful for any counselors thinking about what their vote might look like here.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Mr. Hunter?
Yes, I just wanted to verify that the finance department has those reports.
Daniel, we do not.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on this? Okay, I'm looking for a motion, or if there's, I suspect we might get a motion. If there's a lack of a second, I would suggest we move to Counselor Long's suggestion. So anybody want to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to adopt resolution number 21-031, approving a rate increase averaging approximately 5.05%, resulting from increased operational and disposal fee costs incurred by the Dalles Disposal Service, effective January 1st, 2022.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and second that. McLaughlin will second.
Okay, is there any more discussion?
Yes.
So I'm not certain that knowing the profit and loss statement of the corporate entity that owns this is going to make a difference to the report that we received. Is the company has been reliable in the past. It's been honorable. The reports that we have received reflect, I think, accurate cost increases in fuel, and they have been honest and forthright. I just know that costs are going up, and in order to hamper this company from making a profit, I don't know if that's going to make a difference in moving forward.
Counselor Long?
Yes. So my intention is not to hamper them from making a profit. My intention is to find out what our attorney just pointed out we actually are supposed to already know and have record of, and do not, which actually concerns me even more. So I really would encourage council to refer it back and let some research be done. And of course, I want to be fair to the waste management group, but I also have a duty to my constituents, and I will stand firmly behind that. Perhaps council would also like to have a consensus saying that we will do some kind of further investigation, digging before next year's increase. That way, everybody knows that whatever comes before us is fair and accurate.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Counselor Richardson.
must we vote on the motion before us prior to making another motion?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, it's been seconded, so yeah, I think we have
Yes,
to go ahead
we
with
do.
the vote. And I'm going to ask for a roll call vote. Any other discussion? Okay, will the city clerk please call the,
Before we do, let's just go back. I want to circle around. If we choose, because it concerns me that we don't have the information that we're expected to have on file, that is a concern to me. So if we can come around and, like what suggested, is maybe proposing that by next year, we will have all of the compliance in the ordinance or the requirements for the, what is it, a franchise agreement?
It's a consistent, sorry to interrupt you, Councilor McLaughlin, but just to answer your question, yes, the city granted a non-exclusive but strictly regulated franchise to the Dalles Disposal through the waste management. And that sworn statement that is required to be filed must be submitted to the city clerk, not to the finance director, by March 31st of each year. But the finance department has the ability to audit the books like they do for nearly everything, to ensure consistency with what the city authorizes. And so, unless that sworn statement is submitted every year, it appears that they're out of compliance with the terms of the order.
And that concerns me.
So you could still vote no now and send it back to staff and have them bring it back in January with additional information. That would be the result of a no vote on the motion that's currently on the floor.
right. Counselor Runyon.
Is another option, because I have no problem with any city councilor needing more and complete information, as we all would like to have. Can the Councilor Randall made the motion? Can he withdraw that motion at this point, or do we have to go forward to a vote?
Well,
And then by consensus, have it brought back to us at our January meeting with after finance and so forth, and the city manager have had a chance to go through the information. Is that a possibility?
Well, I think it's Council Randall and Council McLaughlin would both have to withdraw their
Yeah.
motions.
That's my
So,
thought.
Council Randall, do you still want to go ahead with your motion or you want to withdraw it?
Well, if what Counselor Runyon is proposing is more appropriate than having the vote and voting no, as Counselor Long suggested, then I'm for that. Whichever you think is more appropriate.
I'm willing to withdraw my second.
Okay.
So am I.
Okay, so I think it's the consensus of the council that we move forward and do some further investigation, and the staff will get back to the city council at the January 10th meeting. And Councilor Long, if you have some specific questions regarding the operations or the expenses by the Dalles disposal, please submit those to the staff as soon as you can. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Well,
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
one thing I will say, and I don't have it in front of me, so I don't want to be specific, but I believe that financial report that was discussed on March 31st has been delivered to the city manager and or the city attorney's office when Mr. Parker was there. I'm not sure what the internal mapping is on where that goes, but as far as I know, we have held up, what we were required to in that agreement.
Yeah.
And if we need to get it again, that's something that they can provide.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's suggesting otherwise. I suspect that the staff's going to have to go back and our city manager is, as everyone knows, is on a leave of absence. And our city attorney is no longer there. So perhaps the staff can go back and research some of what Mr. Winterbottom's suggesting. Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, I just want to say the meeting is at this point likely to be the last meeting in January. I think the first meeting in January is getting full at this point. So I'll work with city clerk to find out where we're at.
Right now, we have plenty of room.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Mayor Mays, I'd like to thank Mr. Winterbottom for that clarity and that update, because that makes a difference. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other comments on this issue or this item on the agenda? Okay, thank you all very much. Mr. Winterbottom, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for your time.
Next on the agenda is item 12B, which is a resolution authorizing budget transfers. Ms. Wilson.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of council. You have for you my agenda staff report, resolution number 21-32, authorizing a transfer of budgeted amounts between the categories of the general fund of the City of the Dalles adopted budget, making appropriations, and authorizing expenditures of the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022. Our city manager pro tem recently just discussed the budget implications and the need for the ask for the budget resolution. And this is $40,000 was originally budgeted back on June 14th at the acceptance of the budget for 2021-22 for a feasibility study for the underground utility project. And based on the scope of work, we're going to need an additional $32,177 that will give us a total of $72,177. We're asking if we can go ahead and make that transfer from the contingency funds and to the city council department. Does anybody have any questions regarding that?
Any questions for Ms. Wilson?
No.
Looking for a motion.
I'll move to adopt resolution number 21-032, authorizing transfers of budgeted amounts between categories of various funds of the City of the Dalles budget, making appropriations and authorizing expenditures for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022.
Here a second.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
It's been moved by Councilor Long and seconded by Councilor Richardson to approve the budget transfers. as described. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
McLaughlin, aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you.
12C, the staff is looking for the authority to increase the police department's evidence officer from half-time to three-quarter time. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mayor Mays and members of council. The city's evidence officer works in the police department. It's currently less than 20 hours a week, so it's less than half-time position. Currently ineligible for city benefits. And with the passage recently of Senate Bill 751, which would require the city's evidence officer to immediately send evidence to the district attorney's office for all cases, not just those that that they receive a discovery request for evidence on cases before them. The time commitment for that evidence officer is going to go up. And currently, we looked at the current time commitment for current workload and anticipated being around three-quarter time. I've also asked Chief Worthy to keep an eye on the time commitment and if additional time is needed to ensure that we're looking at that budget-wise for the coming budget for the next fiscal year. Right now, the budget impact would be an additional $26,438 from January 1 through June 30th of next year. And that is looking at total costs, including benefits, which will be prorated at three-quarter time.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. Chief Worthy, you have anything you'd like to add? The evidence officer is not to be trifled with, is it? I mean, that's a very important position, and it sounds like his caseload, his or her caseload is increasing, and at the same time, we have state laws that are impacting their job.
Yes, Mayor Mays, and for the rest of the council and people on the call, I'm Tom Worthy. I'm the Chief of Police in the Dalles, and you are correct in that this is a mandated increase in workload through Senate Bill 751, which, as City Manager Hunter pointed out, requires all evidence to be disclosed to the District Attorney's Office and made available for all cases rather than just those ones where it's requested. So the level of effort is rising and our property room is full with evidence that requires disposition. And that's not as simple as hauling it down to the incinerator. There's research required there to ensure that those cases are properly disposed of and that the evidence can be lawfully disposed of and recorded. So this is actually an area where many police departments have found themselves in trouble in the past, which is one of the reasons why one of my first actions as chief here was to require an inventory of our entire evidence locker. And I'm happy to say that it is in shape and it is all accounted for. This will continue that accountability. And as the police department moves towards accreditation, this is going to be one of those areas that's carefully looked at. So it's also an area where we might take this interim step now. And as we go forward and continue to measure and evaluate that workload, we decide to come back in the regular budget cycle and ask for this to be a full-time position, but that'll be a next step in the process. Right now, the request here is for a three-quarter time evidence technician to continue to maintain the professionalism of our property handling procedures.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the staff or comments?
Yes, McLaughlin.
Councilor McLaughlin.
I noticed you said it was a mandate. Is this an unfunded mandate from the state?
Yes, sir.
That doesn't surprise me. All right. You know, my next question for Angie is, do we have the funds to transfer?
This evening, they're not asking for funds to transfer. I believe what they're asking is just to go ahead and increase that due to they have room in their personnel budget currently.
Oh, they do.
Due to the staffing.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Yes, very important that we continue this process.
Would you like to make a motion?
I can do that, yes. I'll go ahead and move to authorize the city manager to increase the evidence officer position to 3/4 time.
Is there a
Second
second? It's been moved by Counselor McLaughlin and seconded by Counselor Randall. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
McLaughlin, aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you,
Thank you.
Chief. Thank you, Dan. Mr. Hunter. Okay, finally, we're getting to item 13A, which is why I suspect many people are here tonight. This is a work session, and there is no obligation from the city to hear public testimony, but because of the interest that this subject has generated, I have asked Mr. Eric Gleason to address the city council for up to 5 minutes, if that's okay with the city council, with the understanding that we will be, that he will be speaking for the people who are interested in this subject and maybe present here tonight at the meeting. There will be plenty of other opportunities in the future for citizens to weigh in on their opinion about what's going to happen with the Waldron building. So with that, Mr. Gleason, would you like to address the city council? Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Councilors. And thanks for putting aside the time during this meeting to discuss the Waldron and Mitchell building.
Could you please give us your, could you please state your address, please, for the record?
Okay, yes, my address is 704 Case Street, the Dalles, Oregon, 97058.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, I somehow ended up as being the designated spokesperson for our nonprofit organization, the Friends of the Waldron Brothers Drug Store, which we formed a couple of years back with the sole purpose of seeing to the preservation and restoration of this critical part of the history of our town. I'd like to first give a really brief history of the building and then follow up with just a little bit more of the recent efforts to preserve the building. And afterwards, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if that's appropriate. Additionally, you've all received some comments that we put together about the agenda staff report and some other issues. The building was constructed beginning in 1863 by Henry Clint, and it took over a year to complete. In 1865, Henry and George Waldron opened up their drugstore at the building. And over those years, it was also served as a post office, a newspaper office, the Masonic Lodge, and housed the offices of doctors and lawyers. In 1867, the Portage Railroad was built down the center of First Street and to provide service for passengers offloading from the steamboats to get around Celila Falls to continue on their journey upriver. In 1882, that railroad was connected to the transcontinental line, and in the process, the entire grade of the town, the lower part of the town, was raised. Along First Street, it was raised up 10 feet. So that's why the building looks a little bit sunken right now, because it was never raised to meet that new grade. In the 1970s, the tracks that originally had been run down the middle of the street got shifted to the north side of the street. And when that happened, it really compromised the access to the building. So as a response, the city of the Dalles purchased the building from the then owner, specifically to help preserve the building for future generations. Henry Waldron, the person that the building's named after, lived in town. He was the first school teacher in town when he came to town in 1854. In 1878, he died from overexerting himself during a fire that burned much of the downtown area. And by 1897, the building housed the ticket office of the regulator steamboat line, which is why there's that mural that the Mural Society touched up in the 1990s at the southeast corner of the building. Eventually, the building was vacant and sat empty for quite a few years until it was fixed up in 1923 by Getchell. That's the name that most people think of the building as, the Getchell building. And he opened up apartments upstairs, had storage in the building, an insurance office, and mural painter Percy and sign painter Percy Manser had his shop in there as well. After the city purchased the building, it was leased out to various and assorted civic groups. So first the JCs ran the haunted house out of there and entered into an agreement with the city to restore the building. Eventually the Gleaners ended up in the building and were there until the 1990s. Then after they moved out, the building sat vacant again. In 2009, the city commissioned an engineering study of the building, and then council voted to expend the funds to do the most critical repairs that the engineering report identified. So the roof was replaced and as a seismic membrane at that time. The parapet walls were replaced. A lot of those critical issues were dealt with, including the crack at the northwest corner of the building and a climate control system. By 2015, there were concerns about new concerns about the building and its stability. So the city once again contracted the engineers, and they came in and gave a report. They made a number of recommendations, which weren't really followed up on by the city. So that's one of the things that we're kind of proposing to do, is kind of follow up on those initial recommendations from 2015 to try and ensure that the building is safe and accessible for people to go in and do maintenance. We've kind of, we formed this nonprofit organization really to work in partnership with the city. That's really been our goal, to work in partnership with the city to kind of come up with a way forward to really work on restoring this building and making it a vital and really feasible asset to our community. It's been here for over 8 generations of the town, and none of us really want to see it gone. And we think that there really is a path forward that we can all find that will find a way to reuse this building and to really, make it a vibrant part of our community. All of us in the nonprofit have a lot of years of experience volunteering with the city and doing other things, serving on commissions and committees and doing all sorts of things because we love our town. And one of the things that we love about this town is the history of the town. And this building is the oldest commercial building in town. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a primary contributing building to our downtown. It's the most visible historic building from the freeway, and it draws people into our community. And that's what, really, as we refocus our community and think about tourism, I think it can become a really valuable asset. And right now, even as it sits, it draws people into our community, and it serves as kind of a barrier between the event park and the wastewater treatment plant as it is. And I think we can really find a way for the city to really revitalize this and use it as an asset.
Thank you very much. Before we get into any discussion, does anybody on the city council have any specific questions they'd like to ask Mr. Gleason about what he just said? Okay, good. Moving on to Mr. Hunter has submitted a 5-page staff report. Mr. Hunter, is there anything that you'd like to add or clarify on your staff report before we move to council discussion?
So just a clarification, and I had sent out an email, the architecture and engineering firm was KPFF, not FFA. I incorrectly identified them in the staff report. Other than that, staff report is lengthy, and I think but both myself and the city attorney's points are given to council, and we'll just base our next move on whatever council comes up with.
Okay. Does anybody on the city council have any questions for Mr. Hunter? Councilor Long.
Yeah, I'm just curious what brought this issue back up now, because the city manager previously said that if any city councilor wanted to put it on hold, she would. And I know I put in writing to her that I wanted to put it on hold.
Okay, and Thank you, Councilor Long. When Julie first went on leave, she told me it was on hold, and then I received a request from Mayor Mays to put it on the agenda. And so I put together all the history on what we had done and put it on the agenda. I didn't.
Yeah, I'll take the hit for that. Councilor Long, I did request that this be on the agenda because it's been really going on too long. I'm perfectly willing to move the discussion until after the new year, but I felt that this has really been going on. I mean, it's been 2.5 years since we last discussed it. The building has been sitting there, getting worse by the day. And so I thought there was some sense of urgency to get this back on the agenda. So I'll take the blame for moving forward.
I wasn't trying to assign blame. I was curious, and I guess in my email to someone who is not here to represent herself, I suggested that it made sense to wait until after the revisioning, the community revisioning, which we're moving through the process. The survey's closed and we're moving on to the next part. So I think we're only talking about a few more months, and I don't mind discussing it tonight, but I think, you know, I would like it discussed in the larger context of the future of the community.
I wasn't aware of that email. I apologize if I somehow missed it. Yeah, and I didn't take your comments as blaming me, but like I said, it was my idea to move it forward. So, I do have a question for Mr. Hunter and actually Mr. Kara. At the bottom of page 74, we talk about the liability and the risk. It says as it stands, the building poses a danger to public health and safety and exists as both a legal and financial liability. And then it goes on to suggest that transferring ownership is impractical due to the landlocked location of the building. Accessing the building is impossible without the city granting a new owner a permanent access easement, cutting through Lewis and Clark Park or the city's water facility. The granting of such an easement is a further liability. Can you explain how granting such an easement is a liability to the city?
Typically, Mr. Mayor, when the city grants access easements, which we do fairly regularly, it depends on the situation and after an assessment of the risks, we're granting someone the right and privilege to access our, I'll keep saying our property in this case, although we haven't sold it or anything like that yet. It's granting them access through our other properties, namely the Lewis and Clark Festival Park and the water treatment facility, in order to physically access the building, right? There's no other way to get up to it other than to go across other city infrastructure, other city land, and to grant an easement, which is a property right that runs with the land, would encumber title to the property, number one. Number two, would also lead to insurance requirements that the city would need to ensure are being met on a yearly basis, that are part of our risk management through CIS, through our property and causality fund. And so from a very literal standpoint of legal liabilities, any access that we grant to any private entities or people over public land, namely the city's land, it is the very definition of a liability. Anything can go wrong, and it will be over our land. And so it would require at least some legal legwork to try to limit that liability, which can be done. But at the end of the day, we're still granting legal access over land that is otherwise freely ours, just to access the building. And so it seems, I'm trying to think of an analogy, but I can't. And so it's doing quite a bit of work for not that much to show for it, is the best I can say.
I guess I was taking this, you were suggesting that the mere act of getting to the building through the park is in and of itself a risk. And I'm having a tough time understanding that. But if the building collapses, that's obviously a risk, but I don't understand how going across park property to get to the building is incurring any substantial risk or,
For example, a very hypothetical that I just thought of, so it may not be that robust, but providing access to trucks and trailers hauling gravel or materials to and from the building, or merely just driving up to the building just to access it. Imagining a car accident occurs over city land across this easement, and the significant legal expenses that would be associated with determining liability there is in of itself a liability to the city. It's us taking a risk on our own behalf. And so that is why I stand by my position that granting access easements for this particular building in this particular case that is completely landlocked is a liability that I don't necessarily advise.
Okay. Any other questions by the city council?
Just a comment, I was surprised to see it on the agenda again because I thought we had discussed this and we were going to delay any movement to demolish the building, and it looks like it's back again. I'm in favor of looking at and putting a moratorium until and maintaining the building until further time where we have either some type of a plan or a plan to move, or at last resort, if it's a plan to demolish. I want that as the last step. That's what I need to say.
But you're suggesting that we delay any discussion, further discussion on this until,
well,
as Councilor Long suggested, maybe after the visioning process?
I like that plan, and I agree with that.
Okay.
I would wait until after the visioning and ask some of the folks that are in the audience tonight to get involved in that, because it's important that we all gather together, and there may be a solution that we can find within the city. My feeling is that if it's city property, it means that it belongs to all of the citizens of the city. And I understand the liability you're talking about, but giving people access to that building through either Festive Park or the back road on the sewage treatment plant, it seems, I don't know if it's a right of way. I have not looked into that, but there have been people in the past that have looked to purchase the building. I know there have been a couple of folks, but they found that the accessibility was the problem. And I know the history, and it's the last remaining commercial building, and we owe it to the history of our community to prevent, or at least try to head off, the destruction of the property.
Councilor Runyon?
I appreciate Mr. Gleason's comments and whatnot, and I'm sure he speaks for the full committee. We're not planning on having everybody speak tonight, and I think you did a very, very good job. And Mr. Mayor, with your permission, today I did a lot of outreach on both sides. As I was driving to Chehalis and back, my phone was buzzing, and I made a few calls when I got back to the Dalles. And a couple of those on the committee, I told them their best thing to do was to write some letters, which we received some of those. On the other side of the coin, I interviewed two former mayors of the Dalles who were uniquely involved, and I know at least one of them, former Mayor Wilcox, is on the line. So with your permission, I'd like, because I did invite him to come and listen to this tonight and offer comment if he has any. So I would appreciate if you could call on Mr. Wilcox, and if Mr. Lawrence is still on Zoom, that would be great as well. Although I didn't see his name still there.
He's on there. Yes, he is.
Anyway, it's up to you, Mr. Mayor. This is just a discussion night. We're not making decisions tonight, but as long as we're here, we might as well get it out there. And I like Councilor Long and Councilor McLaughlin was surprised to see this on our, agenda for December. I thought we were going to wait for a new city manager and visioning and whatever else we could do to delay it forever. Anyway, so
I'll add you to the list of people that can blame me.
I'd like to hear from the two previous mayors.
Okay, does anybody on the council have a problem hearing from either of our two former mayors who are here for some very brief comments?
That'll be hard.
Well, I know Mr. Wilcox, it will be very hard. Mr. Wilcox, do you have any brief comments?
First of all, if you resolve this and get the Dog River pipeline built, this council will have done something that 5 mayors and councils before this could never get done. So good luck. 2009, Mr. Gleason mentioned 2009, what was done then. Yeah, it was $250,000 we put into that building. And I'm a retired real estate broker, and a building, other than historic value, which I also know that you can document, take pictures, and then make it go away. It's an attractive nuisance the way it stands, because people can access it just by walking there. And I'm sure Attorney Kara knows what I'm talking about with attractive nuisance. That baby's an attractive nuisance. And as far as drawing people to Dalles to look at it, I don't think so. They say, why is that ugly thing still standing? They go to the Fort Dalles, or they go
Mr. Mayor.
some other things. But the decision at that time was
Mayor
$250,000. And ever since, if you look at the chronology that was presented to us, it's always been save it, we'll get it done, and a partnership. Well, as I mentioned when I was on city council, a partnership involves a hammer and a nail oftentimes, and the city council doesn't always have to be the nail. I think the partnership is probably looking like, we'll tell you how to do it. You come up with the public dollars. And I'm a member of the public, voted against the $250,000 at the time. And I'm really opposed to it now, because for all this great, wonderful stuff, there's never been a plan put forward to fund doing anything with that building. And given its location, just the history too is that you mentioned, the railroad came in, blocked the access. That's what happened. And as far as types of buildings, the building that Bond's Printing is in is newer, but it's the same construction. It's just a pile of bricks. There's no structure to it. It's just a pile of bricks. So if we get a shake, they're both going down.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't like the liability issue.
Before we move to Councilor Lawrence, or Councilor,
Turn me
former
on,
Mayor
please.
Lawrence, Councilor Long, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. I agreed to let the former mayor speak because I thought they were going to speak about things they knew from being a mayor, not their personal opinion. And I don't think it's fair for you to limit comment that way. So I want to hear from the mayors what they know about what happened on council, or their unique perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really don't want to get into a debate because, as I said before, we're going to be, this will be coming up again, and everybody will have a chance to give their opinion. Mr. Gleason was very respectful of that and gave facts revolving the history of the building. So, Mr. Lawrence, do you have anything you want to add pertaining to your being the mayor? Wait for her to unmute you, Steve. She's going to unmute you. Just a minute. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Here's my experience. My experience is that every time this came up, there were a lot of people, including Mr. Gleason, who I don't ever doubt his good intentions. But when there's a discussion about the possibility of taking the building down, they show up in mass and they're all worked up. And then the council says, okay, what are you going to do about it? And then a long period of time goes by. And I can tell you from 2013 to 2015 to 2017, all the way to 2019, which encompasses my 3 terms, what we had was a repetition of, don't do anything, we'll get organized, we'll do something. The last time this came up was actually after I left office, and I came and testified because it was Main Street who showed up with all of Mr. Gleason's supporters and said, okay, we're going to take over. And I made a comment at that time, which turns out to be true. I said, first of all, at that time, Main Street wasn't strong enough to do it. And second of all, Mr. Carpenter, when you turn around in about 6 months, all of these people aren't going to be there. That's the problem I see. Every time this comes up, a lot of people get worked up and say, please don't do anything. And the council says, okay, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to form a nonprofit. Have they raised any money? Have they come up with a plan? They don't ever do it. And so therefore, my surmise over my 6 years as a mayor was all they really wanted was for the city to do it. And the city is not in a position to spend great gobs of money to preserve a building that's very dangerous. And in fact, I remember Commissioner Brown or Councilman Brown made a motion, seconded by Mr. Elliott, to demolish the building. It was passed. The only person who didn't vote for it was Councilwoman Long Curtis. And so here we are again. And I would just say, if people want to save that building, don't talk about it. Show me what you're going to do. That's my position.
Thank you. That is it for public discussion. What direction would the city council like to move in this? Would they
Mr. Mayor.
Would they like to wait until the visioning process or move forward a little quicker? Go ahead, Councilor Long.
I just wanted to say that I have a bit of a different perspective about whether or not the group was doing anything, because I know that they tried to get access for their engineer, and the city manager Kruger told me when I was sitting in her office that she would allow it, but she did not ever allow it or allow Mr. Gleason to do the things that they needed to do to move forward. So it's not so black and white. I'm not trying to lay blame, but I'm just saying it's not that the group wasn't doing anything. And I think it's a false premise to say that.
Any other councilors have any questions or comments?
Nope.
Councilor Richardson.
So I admit to being a little bit a little bit lost in the tangle of the history, not just of the building, but of people saying different things and wanting different things, and that's fine. I would like to see, without spending another $250,000, I would like to see an alternatives analysis and get to some resolution. I don't think we need, I mean, with respect to my fellow councilors, I don't think we need the visioning process to tell us this. There's at least a couple of alternatives, and 3 that have been identified: do nothing, demolish, and allow access. And I'd like to see those just put out clearly in black and white in terms of cost, risk, liability, etc.
Agreed.
So that's what I would like. I understand there's a lot of history. So perhaps an analysis would not need not sort of start at 0. Could perhaps draw on some of that. And I'd like to set a time frame for it. Maybe either move forward with something like a study group or a committee that the city led, perhaps, that our mayor could appoint, or alternatively, we look at something in the upcoming budget process and put a few dollars aside and give ourselves something in the budget, a line item, to have somebody study, write a report, give them a deadline, and that'll put us on the spot to make a decision. Even if the decision is let it stand and keep it as is until someday it falls down. At some point, we need to make a decision and follow through with it.
So you're suggesting that we not wait for the visioning process and that we have an analysis done?
Alternatives analysis. Yeah, I don't know that a visioning process is going to get us down to the sort of level of granularity we need to make this decision. It's a visioning process. It's not something that really is likely to get that deep into specifics.
Before I get to Councilor Long, Councilor Hunter, or Mr. Hunter, and then Councilor Long.
Not a counselor, no way. Actually, I think Councilor Long had her hand up before I had mine up.
Go ahead, Councilor Long.
I was just going to say that if we didn't change nothing tonight, we've already had consensus that we were going to let the group move forward. And so the group is actually proposing to spend the money on doing the structural I can't speak for Eric, but they're proposing to do these studies that need to be done, and that wouldn't cost the city any money. We just need to give them the access that we told them they were going to get so that they can gather more information and bring it back to us. It wouldn't cost us anything. We just need to give them the access that we already agreed to.
Well, go ahead, Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, first on the access to the building, I think City Manager Kruger may have changed her position on that after talking to me, because when City Manager Young was still here and I was just getting into the risk management and reviewed the KPFF report and looked at the interior of the building, I made the recommendation that we not allow anyone into the building because of the state of the building, that allowing people in there is a liability to the city. If something happens to someone in there, or something happens, they do something in the building, either the structure falls on them or causes them injury, or they have some issue with the asbestos that's in the building, then that's a liability on us, regardless of any kind of agreement we might sign with entrance going into the building. It's our property, it's still our liability. And that's what my recommendation was with City Manager Young, and it was what my recommendation was with City Manager Kruger. Some of what Councilor Richardson was asking for, I think we've already got the data on as far as the cost for options, and they were previously presented to a different council. Some of that cost is going to be, as far as the risk, it's going to be anything from, you know, a $20 risk to multi-million-dollar risk. There's no way to tell on a risk to narrow it down, because it's really dependent on what's occurring that creates that risk and what the outcome is.
If the Friends of the Waldron were to sign a waiver, would that suffice in the risk issue?
No, because it still doesn't alleviate our risk. They could get insured, they could sign a waiver, but ultimately it's still our property, and if they're going into the building, we're still liable.
Yeah.
Well, it looks to me like if the only way this is going to go anywhere other than demolition is to get some access to the building. I mean, does anybody disagree with that?
Well, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Hunter and anyone else who has more insight than I, do we need to allow the Friends themselves to have access? We don't need to let people have sort of field trip in there, right? We're talking about, as I understand, potentially allowing access for a professional, an engineer, structural engineer, presumably who's experienced in dealing with less than ideal structures.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, but we're looking for an evaluation of the structural integrity of the building and what can be done to renovate it.
Yeah. Does that change the calculus at all, I guess is what I'm asking. If we were to allow access to a professional, a structural engineer, and not anybody else?
I think it certainly does. There's at least a mitigation of our liability. We're just, not random people are being allowed to go into the building, but folks that are experienced and have the equipment, training, all that.
The last time that happened was in what year? 2017?
No, it was prior to that. I believe it was 2015, because I was still project coordinator at the time.
Is it fair to say that over the last 6 years that the condition of that building has changed? Has it deteriorated even more?
I think it's safe to say that it has. The extent to which I couldn't say, and I'm not a structural engineer, so it wouldn't do me any good anyway.
Well, in 2015, we allowed somebody in the building.
Yeah, KPFF.
Yes. So I guess a question I would have, and I would hope the city council would have, is the liability significant enough to allow a trained structural engineer access into the building to give the city council an idea of just how much it is deteriorated and what might it take to bring it to code or up to suitable standards? Is that a fair question? Or
Yes.
Well, I certainly have that question. Yes.
It's gonna have to be inspected even if we're gonna tear it down. Somebody's gonna have to work on it.
So what's the council's pleasure? We can either request that this be done, or we can just put off all discussion until, I'm not sure there was a suggestion that it be part of the visioning process. I thought that the suggestion was more like wait till after the visioning process, but Councilor Long, if you have any comment on that, maybe you want to clarify, but I think that that's something I'd certainly like to get an answer to tonight.
Well, I think that that was just a definitive time frame that we were choosing so that it didn't go on indefinitely. I certainly don't have a problem with going forward with getting engineering reports or other things that we're going to need to make a decision anyway, because delaying is just going to delay the whole process. So we might as well know sooner rather than later if this is even feasible. And like I said before, we've already voted and given permission, or maybe we didn't vote, maybe we just did consensus, but for the nonprofit to be able to do their studies and come back to us with a proposal. And the only reason they haven't been able to do that is they haven't been able to get access to the building. So I suggest we just allow them the access we already agreed to.
Councilor Runyon.
Here I go again. I respect all of your opinions and so forth. KFF was the design firm that did the city's inspection and analysis. Is that correct?
KPFF, yes.
KPFF. Then I would think the logical analysis would be to have that same party, if they're agreeable, to do an update on their original analysis and come back with those answers to answer Councilor Richardson's questions, and hopefully sooner than later. And at some point in the next quarter or so, we go to a thumbs up, thumbs down, and get this taken care of with that information in hand.
I'd like to know what that cost would be for an inspection.
Well,
before I agree.
That's why we'd have to ask them if they would be, you know, we've used them before. They're familiar with the city. They're a trusted entity, but they may be too busy to do such a task. But I think that would be the first company that I would approach.
Anybody have a problem with that suggestion?
I think the nonprofit should be able to choose who they want if they're paying for it.
I haven't heard them
Then we
say,
have basically a second opinion, just like if you go to the doctor.
Mr. Kara.
Just a thought.
Thank you, Mr. Mays. Sort of echoing what Councilor Long just mentioned, it's my understanding that Mr. Gleason and his group have amassed some capital in support of their mission to preserve and prevent the demolition of the Waldron building. To that end, I did meet with Mr. Gleason and Ms. Kruger a few months back, where we talked about that. Eric, is it fair to say that you still have some funds available for investigating whether or not, well, at the time, I believe you did mention that the structural engineer performed in 2015, analyzed the building's structural integrity, but didn't contemplate the idea of moving it. And so it's my understanding that after you and I met with Ms. Kruger, that you had some funds reserved for determining the structural integrity of relocating the building. Is that still the objective of what your group is thinking about doing here?
We are primarily looking, because of the cost associated with moving both to the physical structure of the building and the dollar figures moving the building, we're primarily looking at preserving the building in place.
Okay. And
If that's, you know, if it comes to moving, we're also interested in moving because the building is such an integral part of our community. But I think an engineering study would answer both of those questions. And we have an engineer online who specializes in historic buildings, who's worked on my property and worked on various associated other properties in this community.
right. In 2018, it appears that you received a record from Mark Hefty at Emmert International indicating that it would cost nearly $800,000 to relocate the building. And so I'm wondering if you happen to recall that letter that you received back then. Did they perform any sort of analysis as to the building's structural integrity?
So what they did was they came out and they actually toured the building. So there have been people in there since 2015. We gained access through getting them to sign waivers. And so they signed a waiver, went through the building, looked at it, and basically said that that was their estimated cost and that there would be additional engineering work that would be required to move the building.
And so you're proposing retaining an engineering firm to conduct or at least perform an analysis of what that additional engineering work is that right?
So what we're proposing is an engineering firm to look at the structural condition of the building as it stands. At some point, if it's decided to move, then there will have to be additional structural engineering done.
And your group, I'm sorry for badgering you with questions, but I think we're getting somewhere. And your group has the capital necessary to finance that investigation?
We do.
Okay. And so you're not asking the city to finance that investigation. You're merely asking the city for access for your professionals to enter the building to investigate. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
How much do we think that's going to cost you?
I believe that the quote that I got was around $5,000. We have $8,000 in funding. I know it sounds like a little bit.
That doesn't sound like a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what kind of investigation can be done for $5,000. Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Mayor Mays. Getting back to Councilor Runyon's question, the 2015 visit from KPFF where they did a reassessment of their original report. It was also in conjunction with Peter Major, I think it is. It's MEIJER Architecture PC out of Portland. They both came out. Total cost for both of them was $2,005 in 2015 to basically just do a reassessment of the deterioration that they had found in the original study.
I kind of like Councilor Runyon's suggestion to have our people do it and we pay them. With all due respect to Mr. Gleason's firm, and I would, it's our property, and I just think that if there's going to be an evaluation of the building that we own, we ought to commission it and we ought to pay for it. That's just my opinion. Anybody else? So, looking for some direction. I know the staff is.
I agree with that, Mr. Mayor. This is Councilor Richardson. It's our building. We have more than one question, at least that I would like to see answered. And so I don't think the salient point is whether somebody else can get in there. It's whether we want and are going to hire a professional KPFF or whomever staff recommends to answer, 2 or 3 scenarios. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilor McLaughlin?
In full disclosure, when that vote came up, I did vote against demolishing the building. I just want that to be clear.
Okay. So it's 3-2. Okay. Okay, I think where we're going here is to ask the staff to come back or at least give them the authority to go ahead and get a study done from an engineering firm of their choice. We have suggested they might start with KPFF, but that I don't want to micromanage the staff and have the staff get the evaluation done. How does, Mr. Hunter, are you comfortable with that?
I am, Mr. Mayor, and I think it makes sense and frankly makes everybody's work a little easier to reach out to KPFF and provide them with the work they had previously done. So if there's been staff turnover there, they know what they're looking at or coming into, and see how much it would cost us to have them come out and do an assessment, looking at all the options and giving us some feasibility.
My thinking is that you don't have to come back to us for permission to do it. It's just we give you the authority to go off, do it now, and come back with some kind of report as to, I'd be happy to hear from any of the others, how you feel about it.
Yeah, if it's beyond my spending authority, I don't want to do it.
What's your spending authority?
50,000.
Is that a pro tem spending authority, or is it?
It is.
Okay. It sounds to me like you're going to get it done for under $50,000.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah.
Okay. Is it okay if is the city council comfortable giving the staff the go-ahead to commission a structural integrity study of the building as it stands now and get the 2015 work updated?
Yes.
Agree to that.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm seeing,
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
okay. Mr. Kara,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarity, are you hoping for a comprehensive structural integrity analysis, or are you also looking for a separate relocation feasibility analysis? Because I'm not too sure how anything has changed for the better for this building since 2015 when KPFF performed its original structural integrity analysis. But we can have them double check. That's easy enough, or another firm. But specifically, I believe that Mr. Gleason and his group are concerned, the funds they amassed was for the specific purpose of assessing whether or not this would be feasible for relocation. And so whether or not additional structural work would need to be done. And so would you like us to ask whichever engineering consulting firm that we decide to retain to do both, or just one of them?
I thought from our discussion 2.5 years ago that moving that building was completely off the realm of possibility, but I'd be happy to hear from any of the 5 of you. I thought that alternative was kind of off the table. So
it seems cost prohibitive, right?
Yeah. Is there anybody on the city council who would like to see a study that has as its premise that determining the structural integrity of the building with the intent of moving it?
I think we need that information. Otherwise, we'll be right back in the same position. We need
Okay.
all the information to decide what to do.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think we have several scenarios we've identified, and I'd like all of them, frankly, looked at. One is leave in place as is for whatever draw it may be, or not, cost and risk and feasibility. Demolition would be 2, 3 would be move, and 4 would be, I believe there's been some discussion about needing a new entrance, like essentially punching a hole in the side of the thing. Whether that's feasible or not. Feasible.
Mayor Mays, may I just respond to Councilor Richardson?
Sure.
Councilor Richardson, is it fair to say that option 1, leave in place as is, does not contemplate any sort of restructuring or any retrofitting or improvements to the building that might make it structurally intact? And so that would be the choice: as is, leave it as is in place. 2 would be the demolition of the building. 3 would be the relocation of the building, and 4 would be actually improving the structural integrity of the building by investing into time and materials to, keep it up. Is that fair for what the council is hoping to see here, these 4 choices?
Councilor Richardson, that's what you had in mind, isn't it?
I
Dan?
think that's the spectrum
Okay,
Okay.
that we want investigated.
Sure. And of course, none of us here appear to be structural engineers. And so in addition to these four alternatives, right, the city will be sure to coordinate with our consultant as to any additional alternatives that maybe we're not thinking about that might make sense in this situation as well.
and for those of you in the audience, I'm sure you understand too that these documents will be public documents and open to public scrutiny and comment. Okay, anything else? The staff feels it has direction and the city council understands the direction we're headed as far as what we're telling the staff to do. Is that correct? I'd feel better if I saw some heads nod. Okay, unless anybody has any objection, I think that's the way to go. Thank you all very much. For those of you in the audience that have stuck through 2 hours and 45 minutes, I appreciate your patience. Is there any other business to come before the city council? Mr. Kara?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to remind you that we have an executive session right after this.
Oh,
Sorry,
thank you very much for reminding me.
you bet.
Mr. Mayor, is this our last meeting in December? Or do we have
Yes.
another? Well, then Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to all the citizens who have attended our meeting.
Let's hope
And
for
I'm
shorter meetings in the new year.
Let's hope our executive session doesn't take a long time. So with that, I'm adjourning this meeting and we'll see you all in executive session. Thank you.